Okay.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. All right.
Let's start over with intros.
Dean, do you want to go ahead and
Jack, you go first, and then.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm Jack Zampolin. I'm the product manager here at Cosmos on the SDK, and very much looking forward to building out IBC here over the next couple of months in coordination with the community. So, Dean, do you want to kick us off here?
Sure. I am Dean Tribble. I am CEO of Agoric, and we are building a smart contract framework with a lot of remote distributed object infrastructure underneath, and one of the protocol layers matches well with IBC, and so we'll contribute our ideas. We'll work together to build a shared sort of uniform protocol underneath.
Awesome. Thank you, Dean. Brian?
Yep, I'm engineering lead at Agoric with Dean and with Mark, and we've got this CAP-TP, VAT-TP split that's established in our community of intercommunicating VATs and trying to work out how to map that onto IBC so that we can have VATs that talk to VATs that are on chain.
Awesome. That sounds very cool. SES Zoom.
Mark, that's you. You're muted.
Oh. Oh my God. I understand why. I'm logged in on the wrong account there.
Well, it's okay.
Okay. My name is Mark Miller. I'm chief scientist of Agoric, and I've been doing work on smart contracting for over 30 years, and object capabilities and the CAP-TP, VAT-TP protocol, all explored in my earlier E language, now transposed into JavaScript and blockchain.
Awesome. Thank you. Berlin, Chris, you want to kick us off there?
Yes. This is Berlin coming to you from two cameras with slightly different angles. Hopefully you can see all of us sitting in a row. My name is Christopher. I work for Tendermint Cosmos on protocol development and research, and I will be helping spearhead the standardization process for IBC in our view, a process that should serve the needs of a lot of, hopefully, stakeholders in the protocol. So certainly us, but also Agoric, also other potential users. We want IBC to be standard for, a very wide interchain consisting not only of the software we develop in-house.
Hi, I'm June.
There's a camera to speak.
I'm working on the Cosmos and currently working on the ICS repo mostly, and working on the IBC implementation on the Golang Cosmos SDK and also the specification process.
Yeah, I'm Ismail. I work in the Tendermint core team and will help out with the specification and look forward to implement parts of IBC in Rust particularly and other languages.
Nice. Bucky?
Hey guys, I'm Ethan, also known as Bucky around these parts. I'm a co-founder of the project and technical director at the Interchain Foundation. That's kind of overseeing and funding all this work. So I'm also looking forward to participating in the specification process and helping with implementations, probably mostly in Rust and Go.
Nice. Zaki?
I'm Zaki Munyan. I've been with the Cosmos project since its inception, and I sort of lead research on the Tendermint side of this whole mechanism. But super excited to have the Agoric folks here because it was reading the eRights papers 3 years ago that made me strongly suspect that IBC would work. So I'm just glad that we've all come for full circle.
Zaki, thank you. I find that very, very, very gratifying.
Nice. Bez?
Sure. Hey guys, I'm Alex, also known as Bez. I'm one of the lead engineers on the SDK team, and I'm just looking forward to help out any way I can. So.
Nice. Raj?
Hey, my name's Rajal. Yeah, I just work tirelessly on the Cosmos SDK, having a lot of fun doing it, and looking forward to having blockchain communication.
Sunny?
Hey guys, my name is Sunny. I've been working on the Cosmos project for about 1.5 years, recently mostly on the Cosmos SDK. And so I'm also looking forward to helping with the IBC specking process, and especially thinking about abstractions in IBC. So yeah.
And I totally want the story about the hat.
Yeah, I was just about to say.
We're having a Cosmos themed costume party in Berlin today, and so I am a Byzantine general.
There you go. Janko.
Hello, my name is Janko, and we recently started using Cosmos and Tendermint, build our solution on top of. So we are interested in joining the efforts and keeping in touch with the community and seeing like how we can help each other.
And who is he?
Yeah. And what are you guys building?
So far, we are building a platform that will consist of multiple blockchains, but we are kind of still dipping our toes into possibilities of the IBC and how IBC can help us, if IBC can help us achieve that. And we are kind of like building as we go, so we are open to all of the possibilities.
Cool. Vidor.
Yeah, hello everyone. I can jump in there because I'm working with Janko. I'm VP of Engineering at Maxenrow, so website mxw.1. The way we want to utilize IBC is actually create an identity-based blockchain solution that could communicate with other blockchains and proving identities. So each other blockchain should remove that layer of identity.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. All right. Well, at this point, I'm going to kick it off to Chris. But first, this 8 a.m. time, Thursdays, bi-weekly is kind of when I was planning on doing this. We do need to keep in mind that there are Europe folks as well. So does this time work for everyone moving forward? I think the next one would be on the 4th of April. Awesome. That sounds great. I'll go ahead and schedule that after this meeting. Chris, do you want to go ahead and start discussing the spec process that we've been working on?
Thanks. Thanks everyone for coming. So we have tried to create a process we call the interchain standards process, which right now lives in a GitHub repository at github.com/cosmos/ICS, which I will go ahead and share in the chat here in a second.
I believe it's already in the chat.
Already in the chat. Okay, great. And on that repository, we started out by outlining how we want to standardize specifications. So a bunch of IBC will be only useful if everyone implements the same thing, and enough that we need to come up with formats and protocols and exact wire encodings for all these packets and application layer standards like token transfer, like object capabilities transfer, like identity that will be understood by many, many different blockchains. So we are trying to specify what it means to understand those protocols in a implementation agnostic way on this ICS repository. And we also want to, in the sort of way of deriving those specifications, not only end up with a rigorous spec, but also open them up to community feedback, kind of have a predefined set of stages the different stakeholders can weigh in at the appropriate times, know when specifications are still in draft phase, still ready for implementation, or more or less finalized. So on the README file in this Cosmos/ICS repository, if you sort of scroll down, you can see all of the stages, which are 5 stages. We have not yet fully aligned these with what actual actions will be taken on the GitHub repository in each stage. The specification process was ported by Jack from the TC39 process used by the ECMA script steering community for JavaScript standardization. So I'm sure some of it will be adopted over time, but we thought it was a good place to start from instead of reinventing the wheel. Proposals start out in sort of the straw man and proposal stages. As soon as there's a markdown document merged into the GitHub repository, it's at least in the proposal stage, and then proceed through draft, candidate, and finalized stages where bullet points in this document lay out what each stage means, what's required to move it to the next stage, who should weigh in, what kind of implementation artifact should exist at that time. So the only standard we have in fact created so far is the meta standard about ICS standards called ICS1. So if in the repository you go into ICS/spec/ICS1 and open up the README, you will see this nice explainer, what is an ICS, and can scroll down to read through different components. Some of this was also inspired by the BIP and EIP processes, which were in turn inspired by the Python improvement process by Guido van Rossum, so long history. But mostly the format is open. We want to standardize some kind of layout structure so that people can easily read through specifications. And then the most interesting work can at the moment be found in issues and pull requests, where we have ported the existing IBC specifications, which previously lived in a few sort of disparate documents, into this new format, and where we're working on standardizing them through this process. So at the moment, go ahead, was there a question?
Just an observation from things like when we were doing, secure email standards and that sort of thing, is that as a protocol, unlike languages, interop is more front and center in the development process. And so one of the things you'll want to add to the standards process is, we used to have a thing we call interop day, where everyone would bring their sender ID implementation or their SMIME implementation or whatever, in order for the different implementations to make sure that that the entire cross product worked. Because you could have things that were all standards compatible and yet didn't talk to each other. And IBC will have exactly the same issue, where we could have multiple things that all worked completely and solved the entire problem but didn't talk to each other.
And a bunch of IETF standards aren't allowed to progress past a certain point unless there are at least two independent implementations that can interoperate correctly.
Yeah, that is a phenomenal idea. We've already included in sort of the roadmap for the version of IBC that we want to launch on the Cosmos Hub that we will require two or three totally separate but compatible implementations. And we sort of want to set as the spec quality threshold at some point, exactly what you're saying, that people who implement it separately have to end up with compatible products. And if they don't, it means the spec is deficient in some area. Yeah, good point.
Right. Yeah, and it was just an interesting observation that you could not test those in isolation. You had to test those independent implementations against each other.
Cool. So you can also, if you look through some of the issues, find a few notes on kind of how we want to delineate specifications and how we want to layer different parts of the IBC stack. What do I mean by that? I think that we can construct IBC as a sort of layered protocol similar to TCP/IP, where higher layers in the protocol are treated as sort of opaque handlers or blobs by lower layers, such that we will be able to retain and construct all of our security analysis and retain the important security properties of, say, token transfers over IBC when we swap out consensus algorithms instead of using Tendermint to use some other kind of finality gadget, as long as we've rigorously specified the sort of minimal set of functions the consensus layer has to provide and the properties which it has to satisfy. So there are sort of several issues on the ICS repository discussing that in further detail. And then here at Tendermint Cosmos, we're working on writing up sort of our set of IBC specifications in pull requests, but they will then be merged in as standards. And we're very interested in hearing about how some of Agoric's work could be become part of this standard set at different layers, depending. I'm not yet familiar enough with all of it to know where it would best fit in. Probably you are better served to speak on that. But we hope that this repository, the point is that this repository should be a place for interchain standards of all kinds that will serve the Cosmos network and other networks which want to implement part of this interoperability stack. Any questions? Does that make sense? Good opener.
This looks like great stuff.
And having been on TC39, I want to endorse the idea of a process that's like the process of TC39. There are some social pathologies that are created by that process that we should be aware of going forward, but they're the low order bit. The process altogether is good.
Can you speak to those a minute?
Yeah, the main thing is, so I've been on TC39 for more than 10 years. ES5 and ES6 were done prior to the proposal process, and it was done by a smaller committee. And at that point, the entire committee was always discussing the entire language. So we were all sort of much more concerned with sort of an organic view of the whole. It wasn't seen as separate, decoupled things. So we were able to make trade-offs across the entire language, and we all had a joint sense of the overall complexity budget of the language. Once we had the proposal process, first of all, it was very good that we actually delayed it until after ES6, because ES6 was really kind of a revolution in the sense of the language. It required the overall organic view. It was only afterwards that we could afford to have decoupled pieces that separately went forward that were, in fact, not just de jure, mostly decoupled from the other pieces. The language needed to get it to a certain maturity before things could be faithfully dealt with as mostly decoupled. And the biggest pathology is sometimes things are less decoupled than the process facilitates. So you require cross-proposal trade-offs, which the process kind of gets in the way of. And the biggest thing is losing sight of the complexity budget. Is once you have the proposal process in place, to all of the players, to all the participants, progress always seems additive. The progress is advancing a proposal, getting something more in, and the result is that the pressures are to add more features, and the overall cost in aggregate complexity of the language starts to become invisible.
Mark, could you mention how large the committee was before and after they switched to this process? How many people are coming to agreement on this stuff?
That's a good question. There's two ways to talk about that. Up through ES6, I'm just sort of doing this based on kind of the visual memory of the people gathered in the room, which is not a very reliable way to estimate. But I would say that up through ES6, we were around 20 people, no more than 30. These days, we're more like 70. However, the other factor is how many people are active. I would say that has also increased a lot. But the 70 figure is a little bit misleading because the amount of active engagement with the language as a whole, the number of people who are sort of actively engaged are substantially smaller than that total.
Thanks.
Yeah, those are all good points. I think that we are likely to have initially a preference for moving much quicker, at least through the early stages of the specification process, that makes sense for ECMA script. The other notable difference is that we intend to, in the specifications themselves, denote which other specifications are required. So this is not the whole repository could conceivably be implemented by one blockchain, but it's also the case that you could implement parts of IBC, say, only supporting token transfers without implementing other parts. So we'll hopefully facilitate a unified set of specifications without such a high complexity budget by making it clear to implementers which specifications they could implement while remaining compatible with each other.
I guess the question I would have there is, like, if we're envisioning this as a layered protocol stack where each layer is kind of separate from the other, how would you just do token transfers at that point?
Oh, you wouldn't. You would need connections, channels, packets, and token transfers, but you wouldn't need, you know, the 80 other kinds of complex assets that could theoretically be in this repository, you know, a decade from now.
That makes sense.
Somewhere in the spec, you're going to have this graph of dependencies, and if you have X, then you need, you know, it's like the tech tree in a video game. You need all this stuff below it.
That's right. That's right. And the ICS1 already has a section for listing required other ICSs. Then maybe we can write some software to actually process into a visual dependency graph at some point.
Well, to this point about the complexity budget and like having an overview of the whole thing, I wonder if maybe up front we can put in a little bit of work to try to find, you know, where the abstractions are more likely to leak and where we might have, you know, kind of couplings across these components that are less clean than we might like, and so sort of try to be aware of all that up front rather than, you know, accidentally coming to it later. That might kind of help ground everyone in the overview of the thing and get an idea of how we're gonna deal with that. You know, like, so for instance, we failed to do that with Tendermint when we abstracted away the application from the underlying consensus. You know, we kept punting on where the thing was going to leak, and then we had this huge mess around proposer selection a couple months ago because it turned out that was there was a lot of leakage there, and we didn't necessarily see that coming. So maybe putting in that work would really help avoid some pain down the road.
Yeah, languages and protocols are very, very different, but I did just paste into the chat a little message that I wrote in the ECMAScript world, trying to remind everybody of the complexity budget issues for the language as a whole.
Also, is there a discussion, Mark, is there a write-up of the consensus process?
Not separately from the proposal process. Alan Werfsbrock has a essay, kind of a patterns-oriented essay on participating in the standards process. Yeah. But that's not really what you're looking for either.
Yeah, so to be very concrete, my guess is that we'll just have a few people who have merge permissions on the ICS repository that are able to move specifications at least, you know, into draft stage, for which the requirements are pretty lenient. And then we have a more stakeholders involved in moving specifications to the finalized stage, which doesn't really need to happen on any particular time scale. I mean, we could launch a version of IBC before the specification is finalized. It just needs to be done enough that we feel confident in using
So as long as we're talking about process, though, it is worth being clear about what the approval process is for standards beyond the process. This is why I mentioned the consensus process. In TC39, it is not that unanimous vote is required, but the consensus process is, people can have a weak objection and a strong objection. And typically the weak objections, will go, okay, I'll vote yes, but I don't like it. I've got some issues, but fine, let's move on. We've agreed the language will do that. But there are cases, but any strong objection from even one party was enough to hold up consensus. And it turns out there are several major elements of the language that are vastly superior because they held that process. Because, just the one guy at Apple was concerned about some particular thing and would not let consensus go forward. And eventually everyone else finally understood it and consensus turned around and the committee did something entirely different.
And now, people realized a year later, oh my God, if we had overridden that one person, we would have been so screwed.
Right. And now languages are different than protocols. And so that might not be the appropriate thing here, or it might not be what ICF wants out of the process. They might prefer to be a final decision maker about IBC or whatever it is. But we should at least be clear, because it will eventually become clear. And whatever the actual process is, people will figure it out, and then they'll figure out, oh, all I need to do is persuade Ethan, and then I'm good, right? And so then Ethan, you'll get lots of corner room conversations as people try and lean on you. Right? we're coming for you. So figuring out what that is so that people can be committed to that process is useful. As a, and we can let it emerge a little bit, but it's at the point where we go, no, I don't think it should proceed with this because of Zot, because of some security concern that I haven't quite articulated. Let's table this while we think about it, and we'll need to make some decisions like that.
Was that weak objection, strong objection? Was there like a couple of paragraphs writing about that? And was there like, if we've got X number of weak objections, or was it kind of this like loose social consensus thing?
Loose social consensus.
Yeah, and it was never X number of weak objections. It was
the ECMA language is consensus, which they purposely do not define. And so there's kind of a social definition in the room that's kind of carried forward by verbal tradition. But it's very much along the lines of what Dean just explained. As new people come in, this needs to be re-explained, and there's always danger of drift. And there was some drift that then got recalibrated, and the consensus process reestablished itself.
Right.
A key thing is that in technical design work, often a trade-off that seems like a necessary design choice is actually a symptom that there's a better idea that you haven't thought about yet. So by restricting progress to the consensus process, often it forces all the players to come up with better ideas that satisfy all the different constraints that people are bringing to the table, when previously they didn't know that that was possible. That's happened several times.
And one other thing I note that might be different, right, is in the JavaScript committee, right, it's a bunch of really smart people, but for every opinion in the room, there could be 60,000 programmers that would have that opinion, right, out there. That each of us is reflecting a very, very small part of the mindset of some set of the 20 million programmers that program JavaScript. And so what that means is, even a whisper of a concern might be reflecting 15,000 people's really deep, oh my God, concern. And so that's why in especially JavaScript, paying attention to anyone's strong sense that no, this isn't right, it can be hugely valuable. That may be different here, and so this may or may not be the right process, but it's worth bringing up because at least that social consensus of what does it take to actually agree when there's a disagreement on anything that's going to be multiply implemented, multiple people where you really want them committed, and you're sort of balancing, multiple interests committed to supporting the same thing while keeping some control and keeping it moving in the same direction. There's going to be a process, and we should be at least relatively upfront about what it is.
Yeah. It's also worth mentioning that good faith is an essential requirement for this process working, because by these rules, anybody could block forward progress, and if anybody does that in bad faith, or is seen to do it in bad faith, is seen to do it in a political way as opposed to on the basis of technical merit, the committee, if the committee ever gets stuck because of a bad faith blockage, the consensus process would probably not survive that, and the committee would end up going forward from that point, doing something else, and we would all be worse off for it.
Right. Yeah. It's not hard to have good faith in that regard. But.
That's a great point. I think for a protocol like this, where you're requiring buy-in from a lot of ecosystem members to independently implement, that's extra important too. So thank you guys.
Cool. So if you want to follow the progress of IBC specifically, I suggest taking a look at issue number 26, which has sort of a set of a few groupings of specifications in the order in which we're planning to write them. How can we most help you guys, particularly Agoric, in, do you think this repository is something you would want to work with? What parts need to be better clarified? And how should they be clarified? Should we read a bunch of your documentation, like make some suggestions about how it would fit with IBC? How do you think we should move forward?
So first off, I think we need to absorb it. It looks, you know, like a very impressive amount of documentation and thought went into that, and we just need to absorb it. The second is Mark has a presentation on our distributed protocol. We've moved moved the bar since then, and we were planning to record a new presentation that is easier to understand, easier to absorb. And so we need to get that on the calendar, Mark. And I think what would be awesome is to get that recorded and have people look at that. You know, that would be the most efficient way to understand where we're going. And we've got, you know, pretty animations and diagrams and all that sort of stuff. And then we can, and that'll get you to understand what we're doing, and then we can figure out what the, you know, which pieces to pull and prioritize while we've absorbed your repository here. So we can certainly look at this repository and wrap our heads around it by the next meeting and have a better answer on that. And by then we may have done the recording of the other presentation. If not, we'll certainly have a date for it.
Cool. From your end, Vidor, has what we've said so far made some sense? Does it sound like this would be useful? I realize it's sort of process oriented, so if you care more about the mechanics of IBC, I recommend just reading through the issues. But
yeah, I agree with Dean. This is a whole lot of documentation that I haven't had time to go through yet, although I've been instructed to by Jack. Sorry for that. But yeah, I mean,
one thing.
Our product is, Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say one thing that might be helpful is if you guys have some feedback on how we can sort of like map it out on the README a little bit better so that people have a good entry point. That would be kind of a call for everyone on this call. Chris and June have been working on this for a while, but just like if there's any feedback for us on how we can make it easier to dive into this and a little bit more understandable from a top level. I know it's been difficult for me personally to follow the work. And when I saw that layered protocol specification, I was like, oh, there we go. And it kind of makes a little bit more sense after that for me. But if there's any other things like that that we should throw in the README, just folks give us some feedback. Sorry, B.
Oh, no. I was going to say you might pull the stage process out of the README into a separate doc and have the README focus on the technical part. That's the only, you know.
That's probably immediately actionable.
Yeah, the issue 26 is stuff I'd look for in the README.
I agree. Okay, we'll do that. Good point.
But otherwise, it all, you know, having got that now as a starting point, we've got a place to begin. So.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone very much for your time, and we will see you all in 2 weeks. I would imagine this call is going to be a little bit larger as well, and hopefully we have some business to dive into at that point.
Sounds good.
Awesome.
I know, is there a email or chat or whatever list for interim conversations about this stuff and questions and stuff like that?
We do have a IBC room in our Slack channel. Are you guys added to the Slack?
I think I am on there.
Okay.
I think I am.
But I don't remember.
Yeah, let's get you guys, let's make sure you guys are added to our Slack. There's a shared channel with a few workspaces where there's IBC chat. It's been relatively quiet up until now, but it's starting to pick back up. So yeah, let's try to move that conversation there. Might make sense to have, as you guys were mentioning, like an IRC channel or something a little bit more public for this as well. So that's definitely something that I can take a note of.
Hurry for that.
I'm down for IRC. We also have a lot of Riot rooms, so Riot works too.
Cool.
Okay. Yeah,
Awesome.
just send us links to all that. That'd be great.
Yep, will do. Thank you guys very much for your time.
Thanks.
Cool.
Hey,
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Yeah.